Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another daily Marvel Snap video. So today we have another list that has been ran for quite a while. I think the core idea of this deck was discovered around the time that Wave was released in the closed beta, and it has found its way in and out of the meta quite a few times. This, of course, has been refined from the Wave days, but it is still very, very strong. And it does really well against Leech, it does really well against Leader, by utilizing a couple of resources to make sure that we get more upside out of that last turn than the opponent does. And so LockJaw is a great card against Leader. If you rotate your card on the last turn and you had initiative, or your opponent had initiative, they're going to copy the low cost resources that you decided to flip out on that last turn, and they're going to get a lower value. You're going to pull into your bigger resources, your Magneto, your Giganto, your Infinite, and they're going to get your Wasp and your Sunspot. And so that is one of the tools to beat the Leader. And then we also have Dracula. Dracula is going to give us and allow us to draw into some big power plays much later on in the game. The rest of the deck is pretty much stacked with some insane power potential. You have your Jubilee, which is going to pull into one of your big boy cards. I've named this deck the Big Boy deck. It is just a massive, huge stat stick deck, and with Leech, it has driven out counter decks quite a bit. A lot of counter decks like to use their Shang-Chi, their Enchantress, on the last turn of the game, and Leech makes that much more difficult to do. And so we've been seeing a lot less Shang-Chis, a lot less counters, and that is where big boys come back in to shine. And maybe we can use this to drive out the Leech plays, because if we get hit with the Leech, we don't necessarily mind all that much as long as we have gotten some of our core cards out in our LockJaw. Maybe we've rotated in with Jubilee, we have our Dracula on the board, or our Captain Marvel. Outside of that, it doesn't matter if we get leeched, because we can either rotate or just throw the massive power cards onto the board. And so the deck runs pretty simply. It does fold against several decks, and I'm sure that this idea, a LockJaw deck idea, can be refined. You could do a Thor and Jane Foster LockJaw rotation. That way you can either cycle or draw into your Mjolnir to get a free cycle tool. You could go with a discard heavy deck where instead of Dracula, you utilize a Lady Sif and a Ghost Rider to resummon those cards. But I like the good and simple old school big boy deck, and it served me pretty well so far. I have been using it to climb from about 83 to about 87 on my alternate account, and it matches up well against a lot of the core meta decks that we're seeing. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over into a couple of games. I hope that you guys enjoy, and if you're seeing Leech, if you're seeing Leader, test this one out. I think it should do pretty well for you. I've gained a lot of 8-cubers, and I've also lost a lot of 8-cubers. It's just getting a good feel for when you have the advantage and when you don't is I think what is going to make you successful with this deck. All right, so first up we have Wishful Heart. The first location is Vibranium Mines. We have our Wasp and our LockJaw and our Jubilee, which is going to be the only rotation tools we need. The rest of the game is just going to be kind of waiting patiently, seeing where the opponent drops their cards, and then kind of counter dropping our own. Warrior Falls is actually a pretty interesting one. If we were able to drop anything that was over 1 power here, then we could actually destroy the Sunspot before he absorbed any energy. Unfortunately, we don't have a turn 2 drop, or else we would absolutely jump on that opportunity. So we're just going to go ahead and pass on turn 2. On turn 3, we will throw our LockJaw into... We're going to throw our LockJaw into Vormir. I would have liked to rotate the Wasp, but we're going to use that as our sacrificial insect. We're going to throw it into Vormir. Sacrifices must be made. That way we can have our LockJaw prepped and ready. Now they do throw down an Electro, which is going to destroy their Electro, which is a really good kind of strategy, but maybe we can outpower them. The only thing that we have to really worry about with this list is potential Galactus. We really can't face off against Galactus very well, unless maybe they throw Galactus into a lane we already have some resources. Otherwise, we come up pretty flat most of the time. I am going to go ahead and throw Jubilee into the LockJaw lane. We're going to kind of stack that one, and then we'll end up throwing our Dracula into the Vibranium Mines, and we'll just work on stacking some power over there. Between the Jubilee, there's only one more low power. there's only one more low power card that we could pull into, which would be our Sunspot. Captain Marvel is actually a pretty decent one for us. And so now we do have our Sunspot. We have our Dracula. We're going to rotate the Sunspot out. We're going to throw Dracula into Vibranium Mine like we intended to do last turn. And then we should be able to find some upside. Sunspot is the last low-cost card that we have. So the remaining cards are all going to be high power, high impact. So we have Hulk, Magneto, and we have Chavez that are left in our list that Sunspot can pull into. Alright, so they go ahead and play Scorpion into Vormir, which they have already sacrificed one card there. And so then they also follow up with a Wave, which is okay. That just means we can only play one card. Our Magneto pulls their Wave over into Vormir. Our Dracula is going to come down. If we draw into a Vibranium, we're not going to be able to flood that onto the board as easily. We can do our Death and something else, though. We could throw one of those cards into the Lockjaw lane to rotate, but I think what we're going to do is just stack our power into the Vibranium Mines. So if they end up throwing a leader somewhere, then our Dracula is going to absorb either a 13 or a 19 power card here. We have our Captain Marvel that can act as a rover. I'm going to go ahead and snap. That will probably entice them to retreat. If they use a leader, then the Chavez will get copied, but the Sunspot will still get destroyed here. And even if they skip and let him absorb energy, it's still going to destroy the Sunspot. And so we're sitting in a pretty good spot. I'm really confused as to why they didn't retreat. They leaned, I think, too heavily in on their leader play, because we have a massive resource that's going to come down in the Dracula lane and absorb after the fact. So after leader copies everything, and then we already had Vormir 1, we force a tie into Warrior Falls, and we end up with the win condition. So this deck list does a pretty good job against Leech and Leader, because Dracula can absorb power after the fact, so we get a big power push even after Leader triggers. And then Lockjaw, if we have initiative, then we can rotate cards, and their Leader actually won't copy anything because we technically didn't play anything out onto the board that's still out on the board. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one, see if we can keep the high rolls going. All right, next up we have Jay, and the first location is Warrior Falls. The starting hand is stacked with high power, high cost things. Now, if they end up destroying enough cards, then we can actually get the benefit from death, which is one of the things that I like about this list, is that we can sneak in that free death. Even if they drop Wave on that last turn, we could do death and something else, which is usually just enough to kind of surprise them. And then if they don't run destruction tools, our Dracula can always absorb into death. We can always flip into death with our Lockjaw. We have several ways to get that power out onto the board, even if they're not running that destruction tool. And so we both pass on turn 2 into Sakaar, pulling into our Giganta, which is, I'd say, gigantic. We're going to go ahead and skip on 3 as well with this massive power. I think we're going to go ahead and snap. Grand Central is huge for us. Locations like Sakaar, the odds are they always pull into a good unit for us, so we get more upside out of those locations than most other decks do. You kind of use that tempo to find our advantage. All right, so they end up storming the middle location. And so if we can draw into our Dracula, perfect. If not, we're going to go with a Hail Mary of a Jubilee play. And we have a 1 out of 5 shot of pulling into our Lockjaw. I think we go ahead and risk it with the Wasp play as well. If we pull into Lockjaw, then Wasp will actually rotate and we'll be able to find some increased upside. Both of those are very situational, but that is what we're going to shoot for. We're gonna hope for the best. Jubilee has a pretty good shot of pulling into a big, massive unit. So it pulls into our Infinite, and that should be enough, I would imagine, to force them into a retreat here. There's just... I don't feel like there is much hope for them. We are going to go ahead and throw Captain Marvel down onto the board. Next turn, we could do a Magneto to pull their Killmonger, their Storm, and their Jessica Jones over into either Sakaar or into Warrior Falls. And then our Captain Marvel can act as a rover. So they did have a Shang-Chi play. So I think I'm going to play Magneto into Warrior Falls, and we are just going to hope. Captain Marvel can move over here after the game ends. What we're hoping for is that we pull Storm, Killmonger, and another low-cost card, or that they play a low-cost card here, so that we don't pull the massive unit of the Jessica Jones.
So they use a Magneto. It pulls our Jubilee over into Sakaar, but that's not enough. We do have Magneto that pulls their Shang-Chi, their Jessica Jones, unfortunately, and their Killmonger. With Warrior Falls, we are going to destroy the Nova. That gives them a +1 power bonus to all of their cards, and they are going to find the win condition as a result. But maybe Captain Marvel. Does Captain Marvel have the capacity to move? She does. Oh, we find the win by 1 point here. A very, very close game. I thought we had lost. As soon as I saw the stacked Shang-Chi, Killmonger, and Jessica Jones along with the buff from Nova, I thought, without a doubt, we had lost that one. All right, let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Cortex, and the first location is Shadowland. So we have the Negative Ninja. We also have our Sunspot in our starting hand. We have LockJaw, but we are going to go ahead and throw Sunspot onto the board. In some games, we like to hold on to our Sunspot just to try to get a feel for if they're running a Death Wave, if they're going to have a Killmonger, just to see if we can more strategically utilize it. Maybe we need to flip the Sunspot instead of having it on the board to absorb some of this extra energy from us passing. But we did just go ahead and throw it onto the board. They do use an armor into Vormir, which is kind of an interesting playline. That means we can do our Lockjaw into Vormir. We can then do a Jubilee on 4, and that's going to give us 2 big units in Vormir. We do have the Sunspot to the left. I don't know if they're going to end up destroying it. I assume that they do. And so we are going to snap, knowing that, ooh, they could be running a Leech, right? A Leech on 5 could be what they're playing, and then it could also be a Leader, which none of those we're necessarily worried about or concerned about. We can throw our Wasp into the deck, and then we can flip our Jubilee back in as well. We're going to do Jubilee first and then Wasp. Just in case we pull back into Jubilee, it's not a great pullback, but it's okay. I would rather draw into our Wasp and have Wasp in hand since it's free, rather than have it flipped back into in the Lockjaw lane. So we are going to have a really big power push in Vormir. We have our Dracula, we have our Chavez, and then the Wasp comes down and pulls into a massive Infinite. So unfortunately, we stacked just a little bit too much power into Vormir, but I think it's okay. We can play our Captain Marvel. We can do a Wasp into Monster Island. If they end up trying to do a leader play on the last turn, if they end up doing a Leech here, that actually works in our favor. They have a Vision, which is not going to be great for them. We could do Jubilee. We don't have anything left in our deck. So instead, we could do Magneto. That could pull their Maximus, and we don't necessarily want to do that. We have a big enough lead in Vormir that I don't think we need to angle that way. We can do our Giganto. If they play a leader, then we actually lose this matchup, right? If they do a leader, then our Captain Marvel can actually move over into Monster Island and find us the win condition. And so even if they leader, they'll beat us here, but I don't think they beat us everywhere. So let's go ahead and lock in the Giganto. Do we see the leader play come down? The leader will copy Giganto. We lose in Shadowland. Our Captain Marvel will come in clutch, find us the win condition in Monster Island. Very easy, straightforward, very predictable playline. This is a very standard deck right now, and so by being able to identify those decks, leader decks are very, very susceptible to the counterplay from Captain Marvel, from Sunspot, from Dracula, and from Lockjaw, and so it makes it hard for them to stick it out. I'm surprised that Cortex played that one all the way through to the end. Maybe they didn't calculate the Captain Marvel move, but we are going to go ahead and jump over into the next one.
All right, next up we have Minako, and the first location is Kiln. We have our Dracula, which is a beautiful piece of our combo. We do like this enough to snap, but I'm going to hold off. I'm going to wait. We don't want them to know exactly how excited we are about the Kiln location. That could encourage them to push a Reality Stone and change it. And so let's go ahead and play our Sunspot. We'll play it into Lemuria. It's not going to absorb any energy this turn, but that's okay. I guess we don't necessarily need it to. It's just there for a little bit more consistency. And then they do flood 2 more cards into Kiln. One could be the Reality Stone, but we don't know for sure. I think we're going to lean in with the Lockjaw. We could do Dracula, but that would mean our Lockjaw rotation would have to be done in Lemuria. And I don't necessarily like that playline or that idea. So they do the Time Stone, they do Soul Stone, and they use a Carnage to destroy those cards, which are okay. And then Ant-Man comes down, so I don't think they'll have a Killmonger. We're going to go ahead and snap now. We probably should have snapped before the lockjaw came down. We're going to snap. We're going to play a Jubilee into the lockjaw. That will give us 2 flips. We only have 1 dud card left in our deck, and that's a wasp. Otherwise, they're all going to be good cards to be flipped into. We have our Infinite. We have our Chavez, our Magneto. Some really strong cards that we can flip into here. And so the Jubilee comes down. They have 11 power in Kiln. We have our Chavez, and then we flip into a Magneto, which also pulls their Bishop over, which isn't great, but it does give us a pretty big power push. Maybe if we play our Captain Marvel, maybe we can find a way to push more power over into that location if it looks like we need it. But I really don't think that we will. I'm going to go ahead and play Captain Marvel into Lemuria regardless, because then she can move over into Miniaturized Lab and act as kind of that buffer if we need her to. And so they do get a buff up to 17 with the blue Marvel play. And we could do Dracula into Miniaturized Lab, but the only issue with that is that it's played after Captain Marvel. So Captain Marvel would resolve before Dracula would. It wouldn't necessarily take into account how much power our Dracula has. We were leaning more towards doing something like a Death or a Hulk into the Miniaturized Lab, and that would give Captain Marvel 2 locations to rove over into depending on what they dropped. But we will take the 2-cube win. Let's jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Galisted, and we have our Lockjaw, we have our Jubilee, we have our Wasp. We're going to be able to have a stacked out lane pretty easily as soon as we want to. And so we're going to look to angle maybe a Dracula into another lane. Maybe a Sunspot. A Captain Marvel acts as a pretty good buffer. And so for here, we're still going to skip on turn 2, and we're just going to try to get a little bit of information. So they have a Sentinel. A lot of times that's ran in a pretty standard Dino Control deck list. And so let's see if we can work around the Dino Control kind of aspect. We do have our Sunspot. We could play it into Dream Dimension. We have our rotation tools. I think we're actually going to sacrifice our Wasp here. We either sacrifice our Wasp or play our Lockjaw into Hala. The only reason I like sacrificing Wasp is there's not really another card that I feel comfortable sacrificing. So if we don't throw away the Wasp here, we probably just won't play into Vormir, and then that really restricts our line of play. And so they do play a Mysterio. It looks like more of a counter-style stat deck rather than the Dino Control that I thought it might be. So we can expect the Nova, we can expect a Sarah, maybe some counter cards, just some strong value or point value that they're putting onto the board. But we're okay. We're okay with that. I'm going to go ahead and do the Jubilee into the double flip. We have our Sunspot that we might play into Dream Dimension and just let absorb some energy. We have Captain Marvel that can act as our rover if we want it to. And then I assume that they probably do a Killmonger. So Sunspot's not our best choice. We could always use it to rotate. Because I assume that they probably have a Killmonger that's going to be used to destroy their Nova. So they play Lizard and Sentinel. Lizard in Hala, Sentinel into the Dream Dimension. We are going to have a really stacked Vormir. So the Dracula comes down in Vormir, which is not necessarily what we wanted. I typically like to split our Lockjaw and our Dracula, just to spread that power across the board. We can do a Sunspot to the left. Let's go ahead and skip. We'll do Infinite to the left and just hope that the 20-ish power that we have in Vormir is enough to find our win. Now, if they have a Shang-Chi, this one does get pretty rough. But I think 20 power to the left is going to be enough for us. I hope. This could be the real one that would put them up to 13. I think that this list runs a consistent version of like a Sarah stat value board, and I don't think it goes very tall. So I don't think they're going to have 7 additional power to throw into the Dream Dimension. They could. I could be wrong. But I don't feel like they're going to. So I expect several cards dropped here on this last turn, but I don't think any of them are going to be quite enough. It looks at pushing a moderate amount of power into all 3 lanes, and so if you can go tall, or if you don't have a counter, then you lose a lot of potential. So they do play a Sentinel. That means a 5 power card can be played to the left. It is a Maximus. That is not enough to beat our Infinite. We do absorb a 12 power Magneto in the far right lane to win the tiebreaker. The 20 is just enough to match the power of their Maximus, since their real Mysterio was in Dream Dimension. And then we have the tiebreaker in Vormir. So even if they had a Shang-Chi, they would have had to take a lot of their power push on this last turn, commit it to dropping 3 power into Vormir. We still would have had the 12 power absorption from Dracula. Dracula just puts counter decks and leader decks and leech decks in a difficult spot because it's still going to push a lot of power and a relatively large amount of power after the game ends. But with that win, we are going to go ahead and end the video here. This deck does pretty well against a pretty wide range of different opponents and matchups. There are a few that it folds to, and I'm sure the LockJaw portion can be refined even further. This is supposed to be just kind of a base, bare bones, big power rotation deck, and I'm sure you can refine it. I think Thor would be a great addition. Maybe some of our new cards could find their way into this list and serve the deck pretty well. But as far as it goes, this one is very strong. You know very well what you're going to rotate into, what your LockJaw is going to pull into. It's very consistent at doing what it does very well. And so if you're running into a lot of leeches, a lot of leaders, this can absolutely outplay and outmaneuver both of those decks. And so if that is what you're seeing a lot of, I say run a LockJaw, a big boy LockJaw rotation deck for a little while. And eventually we will slowly but surely chip away at the leech meta and make it less valuable to run them, and then hopefully leech becomes less of an issue. But as always, I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave it a like and a comment down below. As always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.